Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Salt Lake City for North America Smart Energy Week, Solar Power International, and Energy Storage International.
As demand for energy increases, the need to find more and better ways to power our world has never been greater. The transition to a lower carbon future brings opportunity. Through our new energies business, Shell is investing up to $2 billion a year in cleaner energy solutions. To reduce CO2 and keep us on the move, we're opening hydrogen stations across Europe, California, and in Vancouver. For electric vehicles, we've introduced fast charging at fuel stations to recharge in less than 30 minutes. Shell's New Motion provides the largest network of charging points in homes and businesses across Western Europe. Shell Ventures is helping startups that offer cleaner energy solutions grow, like Aurora, an autonomous driving company transforming the way people and goods move. We're investing in biofuels too, researching fuel made from biomass waste. And through our joint venture Ryson, we're producing a biofuel that can reduce emissions by up to 70%. To meet the growing demand for renewable energy, we're investing in wind projects in the US, the Netherlands, and exploring opportunities worldwide. Our projects in the North Sea will have capacity to provide enough energy for almost 1 million homes. We've invested in one of the largest independent solar energy producers in the US and expanded into Asia. In the US and UK, we've acquired energy suppliers, which allows us to deliver directly to our customers. To offer residential customers more choice in cleaner energy solutions, we've acquired Sonnen, which allows solar energy to be stored in your home and shared with other users. We're also finding commercial ways to provide reliable electricity to homes and businesses across Africa and Asia. Our new energies business is driving transition to a lower carbon future. Powering progress together by providing more and cleaner energy solutions. Let's make the future.
Please give a warm welcome to the organizations behind this event: Smart Electric Power Alliance President and Chief Executive Officer Julia Ham, and Solar Energy Industries Association President and Chief Executive Officer Abby Hopper.
Welcome all of you. Welcome to Solar Power International and Energy Storage International, which are part of North America Smart Energy Week. I don't know about you, Julia, I'm so excited to be here in Salt Lake City, although I sort of wish I was outside in the sunshine. It's so beautiful. Utah, I don't know if many of you know, Utah is a top 10 state for solar installations, represents about 6% of Utah's overall electricity generation, and it's home to more than 6,000 solar jobs. If you're a Utah solar worker, raise your hand proudly. Oh, I see 2. Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
Right out there.
There we go. Thanks for having us in your home state.
Yeah, and I hope everybody is very excited about being in Salt Lake. I know some people had questions and said, how is this event going to be in Salt Lake City in Utah? And we couldn't be more excited. We are thrilled to be here. We think Salt Lake is a great home for our event this year. We own this city, as I'm sure you've noticed. We have every hotel room, plus many, many Airbnbs and other accommodations for many miles around the city. But we are so excited to have all of you here, along with 19,000 other energy industry professionals, including more than 1,000 people who are here from across the globe. When we started this event 15 years ago, we had grand plans about what it would become. But I have to admit, we never thought it would be this big and that it would represent such a broad swath of the energy industry. I don't know how many of you know this, but We are now the largest energy trade show in North America. Not clean energy, not renewable energy, the largest energy trade show in North America. And so we want to say thank you to all of you who have been supporting this event, coming, being part of this industry for the 15 years that it's been around.
I agree. Thank you all so much for helping us to grow in this way. And so as you hopefully know, this event really is the epicenter of integration for the renewable industry. Through all of the offerings we have this week, you'll learn about the latest information about the complementary technologies and solutions that are driving our industry. So one of the highlights of the show, and maybe you saw it through the glass windows as you were walking up here, is the show floor. And this year we have over 700 exhibiting companies, which is pretty amazing. I think the most yet, right?
In a long time.
In a long time, including over 40 featured startups. That is definitely the most startups we've ever had. So please, take some time, check out all those innovations and the emerging technologies they offer.
And we have a lot of new features at the show this year that I hope you'll check out. So a lot of these new features really are clear indicators of the increasing interdependence of solar, storage, wind, electric vehicles, and all clean energy technologies. You should check out our new distributed wind display. You absolutely have to find time for our fantastic EV Ride and Drive event, where you personally can test drive 11 different EV models with our partner ESI EV, and also take some time to learn about hydrogen with the education content provided by our partner, the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Now, there is a lot going on this week, and so in order to help you manage all of it, to navigate it, hopefully you've already downloaded the app. If you haven't, we really encourage you to do that so that you can connect with other attendees, find exhibitors, and manage your schedule.
So I hope everyone arrived well-rested. We'll see. Well-rested and eager to go. We are really excited for this week, but we want to set the stage for the rest of the week by talking tonight about the big picture, the big vision for our future. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia to share SEPA's vision, and I will be back soon.
Thanks,
Take
Abby.
it away.
Thank you. So for me personally, 2019 marks a big milestone in my career. I started working at SEPA 20 years ago last month. So on one hand, thank you. On one hand, that makes me feel pretty darn old. But on the other hand, it's really exciting actually to look back and reflect on the amount of change that has happened both within SEPA as an organization, but more importantly in the industry over the course of those 2 decades. When I started in 1999, SEPA wasn't the Smart Electric Power Alliance. We started out as the Utility Photovoltaic Group, how's that for a name, UPVG, before later becoming version 1.0 of the SEPA acronym, which was the Solar Electric Power Association. And when I started in 1999, there was no meaningful US grid-connected solar industry, with just a handful of players doing demonstration projects that were almost exclusively funded by federal grant funding. And in 1999, how big do you think a PV system had to be considered massive? Any guesses? 3.5. How about 50 kW? Not 50 megawatts, 50 kW in 1999 was considered a massive solar system. In 1999, the average cost for a residential system was more than $10 a watt. Battery storage was something that was only for off-grid projects. There was only 2.5 gigawatts of wind capacity in the US. And wind and solar collectively didn't even register in the EIA's data for US electricity generation resources. Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth hadn't yet put climate change into the public spotlight at all. Because of the hard work by all of you and so many, many others in the industry, all of these things have changed over time. Today, large-scale, as you know, large-scale solar and wind are the lowest cost resources in many states. Energy storage is becoming a real option. And there is almost 98 gigawatts of wind capacity in the US compared to the 2.5 gigawatts in 1999. The overall US electricity generation portfolio has become significantly cleaner, with coal dropping to 27% and renewables increasing to almost 20% in 2018, with even more rapid growth on the horizon. Climate change is officially in the public spotlight, with even CNN hosting a 7-hour climate crisis town hall with presidential hopefuls. In addition to serving as the CEO of SEPA, I also serve as the board chair of another fantastic nonprofit called the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, or CELI. CELI is focused on developing the new generation of energy leaders. Last year, I gave a keynote address at the CELI conference, and I told the audience of young professionals this. I told them, you are not the leaders, the future leaders of the clean energy industry. You are the future leaders of the energy industry, which will be clean. It's interesting to note that for young generations, clean energy is not an option, it's an expectation. The cultural battle is being won by the simple reality of new generations with new attitudes. Solar, wind, storage, and other technologies we're all here to talk about this week are not the alternatives anymore. They are becoming the default. So where do we head from here? SEPA's vision is for a carbon-free energy future by 2050. And based on what we're seeing across the country, we know that many others agree. Carbon-free is the new model. There is increasing momentum from cities, corporations, states, utilities who are making commitments to carbon reduction goals. According to the Sierra Club, 1 in 4 people in the US now live in a town, city, or state that has made a commitment to 100% clean energy. Just 5 months ago, that number was 1 in 5. That is how quickly things are changing here in the US. And we have seen a major trend over the past 10 months in voluntary utility commitments to carbon reduction. This is significant, and it is a true indicator that we have reached a tipping point. The first big utility commitment came from Xcel Energy in December last year, but it did not take long before Public Service of New Mexico, PSEG, Madison Gas and Electric, Duke Energy, and others followed suit. Today, SEPA has tracked 43 utilities that have made public voluntary commitments to significant carbon reduction. 69% of customers in the US are served by a utility with a publicly announced goal. 15 of those utilities of a variety of sizes and shapes have made commitments that are for a carbon-free or net zero future by 2050 or sooner. If you're interested in seeing what utilities have made voluntary commitments, check out SEPA's Utility Carbon Reduction Tracker tool on our website. And to get real-time updates on new commitments, they're coming fast and furious at this point. To get updates on these new commitments as they're made, make sure to follow SEPA on Twitter or LinkedIn. Now let me be clear. The road to get to a carbon-free future will not be easy. It will take the collective effort of stakeholders, not just in this room, not just in the US, but globally to be successful. But here, all of us, we need to meet our promises and our commitments so that utilities, corporations, communities, and other governments can meet theirs. We need to get to a clean and modern grid on our path to carbon-free. But we have to keep in mind that we can't do that at all costs. We have to do it in a smart, thoughtful way that ensures that we maintain safe, affordable, and reliable electricity for all people. SEPA is here to facilitate this transition to a clean and modern future. We are leading the way in 4 prioritized areas of focus, what we call the SEPA pathways. These pathways are around utility business models, regulatory innovation, grid integration, and transportation electrification. I hope that all of you will join us very early tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., for our general session, which will be a deep dive on one of these pathways, a very important one, regulatory innovation. SEPA's Janet Gale Besser will lead a discussion with 3 state commissioners about the innovation happening in their states and their observations on what's needed across the country. To learn more about SEPA's work across all 4 of these pathways and how we can help you and your organization, please come see us at our booth this week or visit us on our website. Thank you to all of you for everything you're doing to drive us towards a carbon-free energy future. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Tom Stars, Chairman of the SEIA Board and Vice President, Market Strategy and Business Development at SunPower.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here today to help kick off Solar Power International, which, as we heard Julia Ham say just a few minutes ago, is now the largest energy conference in North America. I've been in solar for more than 2 decades, and I can honestly say that I've never seen the industry as vibrant and robust as it is now. The idea that we could sell out a major convention center show floor and pack 19,000 people into a single week-long event was inconceivable just a decade ago. So I'd like to take a few minutes to offer some perspective on where we've been, where we are today, and where I think we're headed. In a few minutes, SEIA President and CEO Abby Hopper will lay out a vision for the solar industry over the next 10 years that is challenging but achievable. It's achievable not only because we need more of what solar energy offers, clean energy, carbon-free energy, but also because solar and wind have emerged as the 2 most abundant and lowest priced options for generating electricity, competing directly with natural gas. And storage has emerged as a key enabling technology that will help wind and solar capture an even greater share of the electricity market. The good news is that we've seen in the last couple of years unprecedented collaboration among solar, wind, and storage technologies and their industry and NGO advocates. There's regular communication and collaboration among the leaders of those organizations and joint initiatives to pursue shared policy priorities. The not so good news is that while I'm optimistic about what the future holds, if the leading renewable technologies and storage can continue working together to maximize their strengths, I'm also concerned. I'm concerned because although solar and wind are competing with gas as the leading sources of new power generation in the US, our advocacy resources, and not coincidentally, our political influence, lags way behind that of the traditional energy industries. And the storage sector is similarly under-resourced politically relative to its potential contributions to our energy system. The coal and nuclear industries are effectively dead in terms of incremental additions to the electric grid. But they still deliver almost half of the electricity in the US, and their political influence remains substantial and hugely disproportionate to their growth potential. Meanwhile, the natural gas industry, our biggest source of competition for new power generation, has gained political and economic strength in spite of increasing evidence that it offers little, if any, benefit from a climate change perspective compared to coal. Seen in this context, conflicts between large-scale and distributed solar or between solar and wind seem parochial and short-sighted and play into the hands of incumbent generators. That needs to end. Working together to expand markets and advance shared policy interests would result in market opportunities that far greater than what any of these industries can achieve individually. Issues like effective climate and carbon policy, increased electrification of transportation and buildings, and expansion of renewable portfolio standards are goals that should have us collaborating closely. So I leave you with this thought. Stick together, support and join advocacy groups that protect your interests, and understand that organizations such as SEIA can do more through the power of combined resources than any one of you or any 2,000 of you can do on your own. And remember, it's your voice combined with redoubled lobbying power that's going to make a difference in any policy fight that lies ahead, including the challenge of extending the solar ITC. So I urge you to do what you can do this year to support our ITC strategy and advance solar energy in America. If we band together to do that, everyone in this room will prosper in the years ahead. Thank you for listening. I'm going to invite Abby Hopper, President and CEO of SIA, back on the stage.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for those inspiring words. So they said we couldn't come to Salt Lake City and draw the kind of crowds that we drew in Vegas and in California. But guess what? You proved them wrong. You're exceeding expectations thanks to your vision, to your entrepreneurship, to your determination. Our industry continues to exceed expectations in all kinds of ways. So think about this. In the year 2000, wasn't that long ago, the Energy Department predicted that solar would account for just 2 gigawatts of electric generating capacity by 2020, 2 gigawatts. So in a couple months, it will be 2020. And guess what? We're on track to eclipse 95 gigawatts. That's worthy of applause. We have increased solar deployment by a factor of 188 in 20 years. It's almost inconceivable. It's truly amazing. But I would posit there is not a single person in this room who thinks that's good enough. We've done enough. Let's pack it up and go home. And so that's why I am here with you tonight. Because despite growing at literally a breathtaking rate over the last decade, we still account for just a little over 2% of US electricity generation, just 2%. And so over the next few minutes, I'm going to share my vision with you about how we dramatically increase that number. And if I don't accomplish anything else, I want you to remember 3 things. Number 1, the next decade will be one of radical market transformation. You're going to hear that a lot from me. Radical market transformation for energy in the United States, and SIA is going to lead you in that effort. Number 2, it is a whole new world when it comes to the politics of clean energy and climate change. And that new world brings opportunity for each and every person in this room. And number 3, you have both the power and the responsibility to make this new solar and storage age a reality. So first things first, we'll start with number 1. Let's talk about that vision. Where are we headed? So as we announced earlier this year, we believe solar will account for 20% of electricity generation by 2030. And that is a huge shift. Remember I said a minute ago, we're only a little more than 2% now, but it is a shift that this industry is absolutely ready for. So take a moment. I want each and every one of you, I'm not going to ask you to close your eyes, that feels a little touchy-feely to me, but think about your company. Think about what your business will look like in 2030 when solar combined with storage comprise 20% of electricity generation. When we're installing more than 70 gigawatts a year, what will your business look like? How much of that marketplace will you control? How many people will you employ? What will your profits look like? So we are calling this radical market transformation the Solar Plus decade. And I want to emphasize how important that plus is. You guys know this. The energy system is transforming literally in front of our eyes. And you don't have to look far. As I mentioned, the exhibit hall will open tomorrow. It is teeming with companies from across the energy sector. Solar and wind developers, battery manufacturers, electric vehicles, fuel cells, and much, much more. So if we hit that goal, our 2030 goal, it will not just be about reaching 20% of generation for solar. It will be about achieving a complete and total shift in how we generate, how we distribute, and how we consume energy in this country. And I want to reassure you, I want to tell you, I want to preach to you, SIA is 100% committed to leading that radical market transformation. And let me also reassure you, it is going to be a war and not a battle for leadership of that US energy market. So over the next 10 years, as we're reaching this goal, SIA will be taking on tough opponents, providing industry expertise, and collaborating aggressively with our partners. And you know why I can say that? Because that's how we operate today. In Washington, we have secured multiple investment tax credit extensions and other legislative victories. We've engaged in lots of complicated regulatory proceedings with very positive outcomes. Just this year, in the great state of South Carolina, we helped pass legislation that opened up opportunity worth billions of dollars. And trust me, we are fighting like hell for good policy in states all across this country. So with your help, SEIA will drive that next decade of solar and storage prosperity. So how do we get there? It's a fair question. Glad that you asked. Because just today, imagine, we released a comprehensive roadmap for how we're going to reach that 2030 goal. I'd encourage you to go on our website, check it out. But keep in mind, I am not just standing up here spouting 20% by 2030. I've given a lot of thought, as we all have, about how we're going to reach that goal. So the roadmap has 4 pillars, right? And the first pillar, in keeping with the plus of the Solar Plus decade, is really about aggressive collaboration. So we have to collaborate closely, as Tom said, with the wind and solar industries and related technologies to really create a comprehensive renewable energy mindset in this country. We need to work with others to get additional infrastructure and transportation charging. We have to expand our list of allies and fend off well-funded challenges from fuel sources that are moving towards obsolescence. Secondly, the second pillar, we must fully capture the opportunities presented by market accelerators, such as energy storage, widespread electrification, and increased political will to act on climate. Third, we have to pull every single market lever and push every policy driver possible to make this a reality. We need to extend the investment tax credit for solar. We need to advance state renewable portfolio standards. We need to protect residential and community solar initiatives. We need to develop better building codes. And we all know we must pass national climate policy. Finally, number 4, and perhaps most importantly, as our industry scales rapidly, we must manage our growth. We have to protect our customers by being ethical in our sales tactics. We have to be good stewards of our land. And our ability to tackle those challenges and others, such as recycling and cybersecurity, will really dictate our success. One of the most critical components of managing that growth, though, is ensuring that we make equity a priority in this radical transformation. So I started at SEIA a little over 2.5 years ago, and immediately made one of my first priorities about ensuring that we create opportunities, both in our workforce and in the energy solutions we provide for all Americans. So as our workforce is on the path to grow to over 500,000 people, it has to reflect the diversity of our population. And we are only going to reach our goals, our collective solar deployment goals, if clean energy is available to people in all communities. And I do not think of this as a choice. This is not a choice. This is an absolute imperative. I hope each and every one of you understands that and works to make it so. Because that is our North Star. Our success, our combined success in the Solar Plus decade depends on that. So I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that politics and public attitudes around climate have radically changed over the last few years. And so in years past up on this stage, we didn't really talk very much about climate goals. But let me be clear, let there be no confusion. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time. And our industry, the solar and storage industry, presents a tangible solution to that crisis. Under our Solar Plus scenario, solar would account for 20% of the US commitment to the Paris Climate Accord. Think about that, 20% if we reach that goal. That is a meaningful step towards addressing the climate crisis. By 2030, solar would offset more than 500 million metric tons of CO2, more than 1/3 of all electric sector emissions. We have an opportunity to make a huge change. And let me be clear too, this is not partisan. This is not a partisan issue. Politicians and business leaders around the globe are looking for ways to address climate change. And you know why? well, I like to think that they understand that this is a crisis, but they've also seen the polling that we've all seen. 73% of all voters, including 65% of all Republicans, understand that solar can help address climate change. I've had so many meetings, so many phone calls with legislators at the federal level and at the state level, and they understand that they need to address climate change. And they can do that by removing policy barriers and establishing market structures that allow solar, wind, and storage to grow. So in addition to helping address the climate crisis, generating 20% of electricity would spur more than $50 billion in investment in 2030 alone, in solar in 2030 alone. So I'm going to ask you to go back again to your thinking about what that means for your company. In 2030, what part of that $50 billion is going to be yours? The final point I want to make is that we can, and in fact we must, take action now to reach those goals, and each and every one of you in this room have a part to play in that. We at SPI are already hard at work making the Solar Plus decade a reality. To start with, we are fighting tooth and nail on your behalf to extend the investment tax credit. The ITC is one of the most important tools in our toolbox to helping us reach that 20% goal. Wood Mackenzie is releasing new data tomorrow morning showing that an ITC extension would result in an additional 82 gigawatts of solar deployment. That's more than we have online today. Think about that, 82 gigawatts, more than we have online today. To put that in more context, extending the ITC would generate $87 billion, again, billion with a B, $billion in additional solar investment, and create an additional 113,000 US solar jobs. Those are real results for our industry, real results for our country, real results for our planet, and real results for each and every one of your companies. So we have been hard at work, as I said, convincing policymakers of the importance of extending the ITC, and guess what? It's your turn right now. Your legislators need to hear directly from you. You can do that as we sit here. So take out your phones. Everyone, I know a lot of you have been on it. Hopefully you're live tweeting during this conversation. Take out your phones and text "Defend the ITC" to 52886. It won't take very long. You can do it while I'm talking, but it will be time well spent. Let's light up the map and show Congress that people all across America want a strong, clean energy future. The American solar success story is still being written, and we have a chance to build on it with an extension of the ITC. But let's not lose sight of the big picture. As I said at the beginning, I want you to remember three things. We have a bold vision for the 2020s, a vision that will benefit your company. There is enormous opportunity as politics change around tackling climate change and investing in clean energy. And working together, all of us, we can make the next decade the Solar Plus decade. So in the days and months ahead, I will be calling on you, we will be calling on you to get involved in lots of different ways. Because I believe that if we stay focused, I believe that if we stick together, I believe that if we are clear about what we want and why, we will achieve radical market transformation. So thank you. Thank you for being here for another exciting SPI, ESI, and North America Smart Energy Week. I can't wait to work side by side with each and every one of you to make the next decade our best one yet. And with that, I'd like to ask our panel to join me. Please welcome Stephanie Cutter, former Deputy Campaign Manager for President Barack Obama's 2012 campaign and co-founder of Precision Strategies. Paula Glover, hello. Paula Glover, President and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And Brian Davis, Vice President of Energy Solutions at Shell. Great. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I've asked each of our panelists, they're all familiar with the roadmap. They got a sneak preview. I've asked each of them to just give us their thoughts about the roadmap and about the future of clean energy, our goals, and how we might achieve those. So they have very different perspectives. Each going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then we'll have a conversation. So Brian, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here today. It's great to be back in Utah again. I'm, as you can probably detect from my accent, I'm not American. I'm actually Australian, and I've been working for Shell now for 31 years. And I'm currently in our London office, part of Shell's new energies business. And my particular focus right now is energy solutions, but frankly, that's a job title anybody could have these days. The particular emphasis we put on it for my role is very much understanding what customers need out of energy going forward. So I'll share a little bit about that in the conversation. But I thought what might be helpful, because you did see, hopefully if you came in early enough, you saw the video of Shell New Energies, which tells you a little bit about what Shell's doing to make a difference in this space. And before my current role, I was very privileged to be part of the team that actually put together Shell's thinking around new energies. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you as well, because I think it's helpful for teeing up the case why a company like Shell believes very much in the solar plus decade underlying principles. And it starts really from when we looked at our strategic outlook in Shell. We're well known for thinking long-term, multi-decade. And we saw two big things emerging. One was energy transitions, as we describe it, which is the world is moving towards needing more energy, but cleaner energy. And that was very much sort of manifest on the world through the Paris Agreement in 2015. And it's become much more public in the last year or so, with more and more people raising, the requirement to deal with climate change. So we saw that climate change, that energy transition was an important thing to think about. How do we move the world's energy system from one that's predominantly fossil-based to one that's much cleaner and eventually gets to net zero emissions? And the other thing we saw was digital and digitalization. And I think that's an important piece to consider here. We've got Smart Energy Week as part of the discussions here. And the way we looked at digital was that it enables a lot more always-on connectivity. You can connect to devices, new business models are possible. But also critically, the way you engage with your customers is different, because now you've got a way of engaging directly with people that wasn't possible maybe through your iPhone even 10 years ago. Shell is a company that's been refueling people for many, many decades. We serve 30 million customers a day, and it wasn't really possible to have a relationship with those motorists when they come in and out, whereas that's maybe now more possible with digital. So that really featured in our thinking and led to us saying, how do we as a company do something to be seen as a force for good in driving the energy transition? And we did two things. One is we made a commitment as Shell recently to an ambition around lowering our net carbon footprint. And that we were the first energy company to make a commitment to reduce the net carbon footprint of the products we sell to our customers, taking accountability of the full life cycle. And our ambition is to lower the carbon intensity of our products by 20% over the coming years and move in line with society. So I think we realized as a company we need to do our bit to be able to sell to our customers energy that is cleaner and help move the world in the right direction. And the other thing was creating the new energy business. And you saw in that video, there was a lot in the new energy business, but I wanted to pull out the bits that had a particular emphasis on solar and storage, because of course it is the Solar Power International and the energy storage and the Smart Energy Week. And I think it's really interesting if you look at what Shell's doing through the theme of solar, and often solar combined with storage. And we're actually playing everything from utility scale through to micro scale. If I start with micro scale, you may have seen at the end of the video, we are active in trying to bring modern energy to Africa and India, sort of solving the energy access challenge for the 1 to 2 billion people in the world who don't have access to modern energy. And the solution there is pretty simple. It's a solar panel with a battery and some form of charging and lighting. And it's actually a really interesting place to be experimenting, because you have to combine those technologies at a very, very low cost point. because the people you're serving don't have a lot of money. So it's an interesting kind of real test for our ingenuity. And at the other end, in utility scale, we recently here in North America acquired a position in Silicon Ranch Corporation, which is one of the biggest developers of utility scale solar in North America. And we saw through that by partnering with a very successful enterprise, we could help them do more going forward. And then the third bit I want to say around solar and storage is our acquisition of Sonnen. And earlier this year, we acquired Sonnen, which in our opinion is the best residential energy storage product. And maybe there'll be a few in the audience who'll disagree with me on that, but that's fine. But we actually saw a lot in the product that was really good for the consumer. And importantly, it enables different business models. And one of the ones we particularly like is that the Sonnen product has a long life and it's a very safe product. And it can be used as a resource for the grid, as well as adding value to the consumers who put it in their home. So we think it's a really interesting thing where you can deploy a technology to meet a customer need and at the same time create value for society as a whole by being able to use that resource on the grid. And we're actually very pleased here in Salt Lake City to have announced this week a partnership with Wasatch Group and Rocky Mountain Power to bring that to life in our VPP. And the team will be telling you more about that later on this week. So I think I'd probably close my comments at that point. And maybe what I would say is that I've talked a lot about what we're doing. And I wanted to highlight that we don't do this alone. To solve these challenges, you actually need to collaborate with other industry players, with leaders, with utilities. It's all about meeting the customer need in the most effective way possible. And we need policymakers and regulators to work with the industry and the technology innovators to bring it all together. So we can't do it alone, but if we work together, we can hopefully advance your vision one step further.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Paula.
Thank you again for inviting me, and I'll apologize first about my voice. I'm really not Barry White, but fighting a little bit of a cold. So first, I'd like to share with you just a little bit about the association. We are a 43-year-old professional association, and our focus has always been on identifying and understanding how energy policy impacts African Americans, communities of color, and low and moderate income people. And that mission is as relevant today as it was 43 years ago, and I would argue that it's more relevant today than it was when we started. In 2015, I don't know how many of you are familiar with EIA's residential consumption survey, but they do this survey every 10 years or so, and it really does help to inform you about how are customers interacting with energy and where are their disparities, and I want to share a little bit with you about what the latest report showed. 1 in 3 U.S. households today are facing challenges in paying their energy bills or in sustaining heat and cooling when they actually need it. 1 in 5 households report reducing or foregoing, not buying medicine, not buying food, so they can pay their energy bill today. And I want us to think about, like, in the richest country in the world, 20% of Americans choose between, do I buy medicine, or do I buy food, or do I pay my light bill? And so we as an industry, I think, have a lot to do with that. But more importantly, of those 25 million households that report foregoing food and medicine, 7 million households face that decision every single month. So 25 million households are foregoing food and medicine, and this is a cyclical, it's not cyclical, it's not once a year, once a month, it's constantly. One of the things the survey found that I thought was most interesting is that the differences are not based on geography, but that there were noticeable differences on race and economics. 50% of African American households are energy insecure and face that decision every month. 50% of African American households, 40% of Hispanic households, 13% of Caucasian households. And so for the role that I play in my association, these discussions are incredibly critical because there are so many people in households like the one that I have and the one that I was raised in who are facing these decisions. But I also think that it creates an incredible opportunity for our industry. We often talk about energy being the backbone of our economy. And if we don't think that's true, all you have to do is go to a place where they don't have it, and then you understand the magnitude and how important it is to have it. And so SIA's goal of 20% by 2030 really creates an opportunity to change a narrative that suggests that we holistically as an industry do not include everybody. So today, about 7% of the workforce in the oil and natural gas industry are African American, while 13% of the workforce is African American. If you look at the electric utility industry, it's about 8% of the workforce. And so it's not just about solar or wind or renewables or oil and gas or electricity. Diversity is something that's critically important to our industry. What we are seeing in this last 3 to 4 years is more and more regulators across the country are asking the kinds of questions of our companies of what does your workforce look like, who are your leaders, who are your board members, who are your suppliers. We had just this year several House hearings on Capitol Hill where you have legislators asking the same exact questions. Who are your leaders? Who are your workers? Who are your suppliers? We also have Wall Street asking our companies the same exact questions. Who are your leaders? Who are your so and so on and so on. And so it's an issue that we're all grappling with. I hope that if it's not top of mind, it should be top of mind. Because on top of the fact that we don't have this kind of representation and that we are looking to increase it, we also have a situation where our country is changing and your workforce is changing. Mm-hmm. And if you're not inclusive, how is it that if you hit a goal of 20% by 2030 that you intend to sustain your organization if other people aren't included? And so I'm looking forward to this discussion so we can talk about what are the things that we can do and what are the opportunities that we all have. And you'll note that I say we because it's we. It's not you. It's all of us. And so I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paula. Stephanie.
Okay, so I have to apologize also. I don't normally sound like this, and it's quite possible I might lose my voice entirely in the 7 minutes that I have. Thank you for having me here today. This is an impressive group and impressive organization. And, you know, I live in Washington, D.C. I've been in national politics for a long time. I've done 5 presidential campaigns. I've worked in 2 different White Houses for President Clinton and President Obama. And I've never seen the conversation around energy solutions or the need to address climate change reach to the level that it has today, across party lines, and even people who are apolitical and aren't thinking about it politically, but have enormously high flood insurance bills, or have lost their home to a fire, or can't pay their energy bills. And, excuse me, and I think this is an enormous opportunity to get the energy solutions right, and solar is clearly part of it. You know, I was asked to come and speak about how do you build a campaign, and how do you make it sustainable, and how do you reach the right people and motivate them to action. And you have some big goals that Abby laid out, very impressive goals. And you know, the way that I think about them, when we were electing President Obama, or re-electing President Obama, that was a pretty big goal. We were trying to win a presidential campaign and defeat another candidate. And the way we thought about it, and the way that I always think about national campaigns, is you break it down into individual campaigns, smaller campaigns. I mean, to be president of the United States, you need 270 electoral votes. You get those electoral votes in states. Sorry, I'm coughing into the microphone. So rather than thinking about it as a national campaign, we thought about it as a series of state-based campaigns in the states that we needed to win to get to 270. So we built customized messaging, customized outreach, customized mobilization in the states that we needed to win. Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Florida. We all know the same set of states that show up on that map on election night on all the networks. And focusing on it that way, it was a way to really think about how you maintain focus and discipline in achieving your goals. And I think about that as I was listening to what Abby laid out. You have your big goal of 20%, But you also have all these other things that you need to get done to get to 20%, most specifically the tax credit, renewing the solar tax credit. And if you think about renewing the solar tax credit, that is a specific near-term goal with a handful of people in Congress who are ultimately going to be able to tilt it one way or the other. And if that's the case, where do you build these campaigns? You build these campaigns in states like Iowa, Massachusetts, California, where these members reside, and a whole lot more. And you figure out how you build that messaging to appeal to these members. And not all members are going to be persuaded by the same thing. But it could be, you know, the family farm in Iowa who now is hosting solar panels and is able to save for the future, but also create jobs. It could be, you know, the companies in California that are installing solar panels in all those new homes and creating thousands of jobs hundreds of thousands of jobs along the way. So the tailored messaging per member really matters, just like our tailored messaging in specific states that we needed to win really mattered. We didn't talk about, and I'm going back, and maybe, hopefully, some people may not remember this, but in 2012, for instance, we didn't talk about the auto bailout in Florida, but we talked about it a lot in Ohio. And we talked about it a lot even in Iowa, where some of those auto plants existed at the time. They don't any longer, but so tailoring your messaging to reach the right audiences in the right ways. And once you determine what your goal is, and in this case, renewing the solar tax credit, you need a communication strategy to get there. Like I said, looking at this room, I know that these stories exist of how solar energy is making a difference, whether it's making a difference to curb the pollution that causes climate change, making a difference in reducing energy bills, making a difference in creating jobs. Those stories exist across the country. We just need to find them, and we need to tell them. And we need to tell them in local papers. We need to tell them on visits to Capitol Hill. We need to tell them online. You know, we were talking about the use of digital to communicate with your customers. It's the same concept. The use of digital to communicate with your customers or your supply chains or your partners on the ground. Looking at this audience, I know that there's a multiplier effect of just communicating the benefits of what you're doing will go a long way. Think about how many people today, in terms of advocates, elected officials, people that want to win elections, are talking about climate change and laying out the solutions they believe will get there. So regardless of your politics, this is the conversation the country is having. So how do you leverage that conversation on terms that benefit you? How do you make sure that those that are talking about it are using your messaging? Because that's critical when you're running a national campaign. You can't be the voice all the time. So how do you recruit others to be that voice along with you as partners or allies? So getting your message out in front of the right audiences in the right ways is really critical. And then the last thing I'll say, now that my voice is lasting, is that, you know, I run a company now that creates these campaigns for corporations, depending upon what their goal is. And everybody has all sorts of goals. But here's one example. When GE was in the middle of the big export-import fight several years ago, where some members of Congress didn't want to renew the chairmanship of the Export-Import Bank, which was critical to GE's global business. But it was also critical to GE's supply chain, small businesses across the country. It was critical to their hundreds of thousands of employees. It was critical to all of their state partners who were relying on that tax revenue, and so on and so on. So they came to us and said, we realize that these things aren't done in back rooms anymore, because they're not. They're done when you create movements from the ground up. And that kind of movement was what was stopping the Export-Import Bank from happening in the first place. So they asked us, how do we do that? We have enormous reach across the country, but we've never organized it. We never thought about communicating. And we helped them break that down and communicate with their supply chain, their employees, their state partners, advocates on the ground, so that there was a constant communication and sharing of priorities and messaging and activation and mobilization. So it wasn't just GE trying to get that done, but it was actually a pretty large base of the economy that was trying to move that issue. That's the same concept here of everybody in this room. If you leverage each other and you don't do it alone, and you're leveraging each other's voice and looking for those partners and allies and getting the people who are already talking about these issues to lift up your messaging, you can go a long way to reaching those audiences that really matter.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I'll give your voice a rest for a moment.
I'm surprised it lasted.
I'm impressed. I'm also going to stay away from the two of you. So I heard some common themes, in a nice way, some common themes in all of your comments. One is really about the opportunity that we have in front of us, the opportunity to create new business models, embrace new technologies, serve our customers. That's the other theme I heard, was really about a focus on customers and meeting customer demand and providing solutions. And so, Brian, I want to start with you. I'm curious. I think a lot of people in the room maybe are interested in Shell's transition and their embrace of some of these new technologies. You talked a little bit about the energy transition and digitization being some of the driving forces. But if you could share a little bit more. You talked about Silicon Ranch. You talked about Sonnen. So where does Shell see this moving, and how is the business model evolving?
Yeah, I think at its broadest sense, I think we see ourselves continuing to serve the needs of customers, and we will adapt to their desire to have energy delivered. And if you think of something as simple as fueling your vehicle, today we spend a lot of time and effort trying to be as good as possible at fueling your vehicle. And if it's an internal combustion engine, we like to do it with the best fuel and the most convenient, enjoyable experience and upsell you a coffee and whatever else. More and more customers are choosing alternative fuel, electric vehicles or natural gas or hydrogen. And so in California, we are providing hydrogen to hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. You saw in the video NewMotion in the Netherlands, or in Europe rather, we're providing fast charging solutions. And essentially our philosophy in a way is go where the customer wants you to go and continue to provide energy in a convenient and affordable manner for them. And to do that requires us to understand the technology and the challenges of integrating the technology as it evolves over time, and also integrating it in line with the business model, with the right business model. And we're learning the power business. We're humble enough to realize there's a lot of much more knowledgeable people in electricity markets. But what we see is that each country, each state, each market has slightly different market frameworks. They either allow, it's either vertically integrated or it's contested. You've got different pricing mechanisms. And so sometimes a business model doesn't work because it isn't economic in that market. So I think there's also a bit there about being sensible enough to put the right technology and package into also what makes sense in the market. Because if you don't do that, you end up putting the price up too much, and then the customer won't make the choice. And I think the point that Paula made about energy affordability is really quite important. A number of subsidies that were poured in, which are really good for driving the technology down the cost curve. In some countries, particularly European countries, those subsidies appeared on the consumer's bill. And so when you go to a place like Germany, maybe as much as I don't know if it's like a third or it's a very big amount of money for consumers is paying for the subsidies that drove the solar revolution. And that isn't affordable if you're someone who's trying to make ends meet. So I think getting all that right is pretty important.
I agree. Do you see business model evolution or technological advancement as sort of the key driver of this Solar Plus decade?
I think business model is more critical, and the reason I think is that you've seen the continuous march down the cost curve, the continuous innovation. I have no doubt that the engineers and the scientists will keep working and driving, all of the technologies down a cost curve. You can look at wind, you can look at solar, you can look at energy storage. I think we're just starting to have the anecdotes of how powerful and potent energy storage is becoming. And in 5 years' time, we'll look back on somebody who made a courageous assumption that it won't be so big and it was maybe 50x. I don't know if that's quite right, but I think it'll surprise us to the upside. But its deployment, the speed at which it happens will be driven by, is there focused government subsidy to support it coming down a cost curve? And are the business models there that unlock it? Because I think sometimes, energy, unfortunately, is a category which nobody's particularly engaged in. No one gets home, turns the lights on and go, great. You don't come home and sort of say, how did my energy get on during the day? You just don't normally engage with it unless it doesn't work. So it's quite hard to get people to make changes. And so I think the business model is quite important for realizing the potential of the technology.
Yeah. Well, I think we think about affordability, right? That is one of the great success stories of our industry, is we have been able to drive costs down so much, and we are competitive on price, which I think is so important. Paula, the points you raised are critical for all of us to keep in mind as we think about clean, affordable energy, right? That's what we want to provide our customers. I was struck, Paula, by your emphasis on the word we, right? This is an opportunity for all of us, and we together can figure out sort of how to ensure equity in this energy transition. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, about what are some steps that we might need to take?
So I think, when we think about diversity and how that conversation has transitioned, it's not a numbers game, is what I would say. And so typically it used to be, if you talk about diversity, people are checking the box. How many women do I have? How many African Americans do I have? All these boxes. That is no longer the case. We started then talking about inclusion and how do we have inclusive environments, companies that are psychologically safe, that people are culturally competent, that you don't have microaggressions and all of that stuff. And now actually that conversation is moving to equity, right, and fairness, and and it's pretty indescribable what that looks like. And so I use the word we because there is not one person nor entity who can do that without the collective. It's just impossible. You can't, as an organization, think that you're going to hire 20 women and all of a sudden create an environment that is women-friendly if you've never hired women before. It doesn't work that way. And when I talk with audiences of women, I always say, but if you are the only, you have an obligation as well, right, to help create this culture and to help inform the people. I think when we talk about the goals that SIA has set out, the thing that diversity can help you with is advocacy, right? President Obama's campaign was very successful because he had a diverse coalition of people who were supporting his ideas and who were willing to fight for him. And people fight for the things that they are interested in. And people are interested in things that help them economically. And so if you want me to be really serious and interested in what you're trying to accomplish, then an economic tie is absolutely helpful. And that means, are you doing business with me and allowing me now to create jobs for others? Or am I an employee? Whatever kind of that looks like. But I think that it has to be a conversation that's going to be really difficult. It's not going to be easy. And we all, I think, have to get out of our own way in some way, right? We're people first. And so, it's almost like turn off the TV, turn off the radio, get off social media, and let's just talk to each other about the things that we care about, and then begin to kind of embrace one another in such a way that we are creating these environments that people want to work in. And our businesses will absolutely be more efficient, they will absolutely be more effective, and they will be more successful.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you saying that. I think one of sort of inherent in all of our work at SIA is evolving from sort of the check, not that it was like this, but sort of a check the box diversity to it's part of our culture, right? It's part of every decision that we make, literally every decision that we make. And so, but as you said, there is value to that, right? Your business is going to run better. You're going to be more profitable. Your advocacy is going to be more effective, right? You're going to have a more diverse customer base, advocacy base, policymaker base. And so it's for the collective good to make that all happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just hard.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, early in my career, and, you know, I've been in this industry for 30 years, which is frightening. But early in my career, when I was a member of this association and I had colleagues that I would invite to things that we had, I actually had a colleague who was, while everyone told me no and no one told me why, I really fully appreciate this gentleman because he actually told me why. And he said to me, you know, I don't know that I would be comfortable in a room of all Black people. And I was startled. I wasn't even mad. I was kind of like, wow, you wouldn't be comfortable in a room of all Black people. But then I said to him, well, how do you think it feels for me when I'm here with all white people every day, all day? And it allowed us to begin to start this conversation that was like, the fact that they're Black should be irrelevant. If they're nice people and smart people and kind and fun, what do you care if they're Black for? Just like, what should I care, right? I work in a white company and I seem to survive every day pretty well. And that's what I mean by, like, we have to get kind of those ideas and get out of our own way and just say, okay, there are people who have a different experience than I have, and how do we now create an environment where we can work together?
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Stephanie, I was struck by, I wrote it down, create movements from the ground up, right? And that's sort of inherent in what we're all talking about, is creating this movement from the ground up. Can you talk a little, if you can, yes. Physically, talk a little bit more about that? I mean, you talked about sharing our stories, and the folks in this room definitely have powerful stories, but what would you say if someone's interested in actualizing, creating a movement from the ground up? What should they do?
What should you do? Well, number one, work together. Movements don't happen overnight, and you know, something that we all talked about, that this is a little bit of a unique moment, in that you are part of the conversation, whether you like it or not, that's happening across the country. And it might be happening in different ways, with different perspectives, but it's happening. So you need to figure out how to be part of that and to drive it. And just even, you know, I said this in my remarks, but just looking at this audience, if you were able to organize everybody in this audience, that would be a movement from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And if then you were able to organize everybody in this audience and ask them to do 3 things, and maybe it's share a piece of messaging on their social media. Maybe it's sending an email to their member of Congress. Maybe it's finding 5 friends to invite to something where you're talking about climate solutions or cost-effective clean energy solutions, or you know, something locally about the availability for home-based solar panels to cut energy costs. Whatever it is, as long as you are expanding your circle, you are creating a movement from the ground up. What makes it more effective is if you're all driving the same message and working towards the same goal. And that's why I picked the tax credit, because it's a clear goal. It's an achievable goal. It's a goal that has clear proof points on the effectiveness. Just look at what's happened over the past decade. And it's something that the people that you're trying to influence are familiar with and have, in some way, some experience with it in their own state. So, excuse me, that's what I mean by creating a movement from the ground up. The way our politics works now, the way President Obama's campaigns were so effective, was building a coalition that looked like America, but also that coalition was working outside of Washington, not from within Washington. He was the non-establishment. If you can demonstrate that solar energy is a cost-effective, achievable, and effective piece of the climate solution, you can create a movement from the ground up, because that conversation is happening. You just need to make sure that you're in that mix.
In it, exactly. So I will do a little plug, both for our advocacy work around the tax credit, but certainly there are opportunities, panels happening here this week around sort of updates on that, and stop by our booth for ways that you can help us create that movement from the ground up. I want to bring us back to the Solar Plus decade, because I'm clearly really like it, spent a lot of time thinking and talking about it. And Brian, I'm curious, as you think about the Solar Plus decade, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for us to sort of grapple with, and where do you think is sort of the biggest opportunity as we look at this next decade?
Interesting one. I think from a North American perspective, I guess it will be, probably the biggest challenge will be if you over succeed on deploying solar, you'll create a lot of other potential side effects on the grid that need to be managed. And then how do you collectively manage that so that you continue to have further deployment of solar? We've seen in other markets, and maybe my home country of Australia, South Australia has been very successful at deploying a lot of renewables, but when it went wrong, it was sort of, it was blamed, and people don't like the lights to go out. So I think there's probably a challenge, and I'm not an expert on the US grid, but I just look a bit from the outside in, that you've got aging infrastructure and you're deploying these new technologies, you've got bidirectional flow in the grid, you've got a fiercely kind of independent, natural kind of, that's what makes the country so successful. So when you start getting solar deployed, in people's homes and offices and businesses, and the grid is moving in ways it didn't, how do you reconcile that with, the legislators having to keep pace, and the utilities investing in the right way, and the way stuff goes? I just worry somewhere that you'll deploy the solar faster than the regulators and the kind of assets can catch up.
Yeah, no, I think that's something we worry about as well. And actually, tomorrow morning's panel will have regulators talking about how they're trying to keep up with technology. But part of what I heard inherent in your answer is that we have to keep partnering with other technologies to manage that grid effectively.
Correct. And I think that's what sort of, to me in a way, that's if it's just solar alone. But if you start pairing solar with storage,
right,
then you get a very different paradigm. Because in some ways you're kind of taking load off the grid. You've got the so-called load defection discussion. And we see energy storage becoming more affordable. And more and more people can effectively go 100% self-consumption, but they're still connected to the grid. So it's maybe over a year, it's all net consumption, but at various times you're calling on the grid. And then how do we recognize and socialize the cost of a grid in that world? And so that's a very different market design from the one that exists today.
So I hear both the biggest challenge and perhaps the biggest opportunity is the same. Sort of how do we incorporate the intermittent nature of solar, and how do we increase those other technologies? And
then you add in the fact that over this same period of time, I think electric vehicles will start penetrating much more than people expect. So when you've got more and more people typically charging at home and plugging in electric vehicles, you'll have batteries at home that kind of move around, but they come home. And if you can tap into and orchestrate those fleets of vehicles, then that might be a sort of possible solution.
Exciting. Paula, so you mentioned, I won't say 30 plus years in the energy industry. So as you think about the Solar Plus decade, what do you think are the biggest opportunities and perhaps the biggest challenges that we might face?
I think probably one of the biggest challenges is going to be dealing with the regulatory construct. It sounds simple to unravel what we do now and build this new thing. And I think there's probably great frustration that regulators haven't just kind of gotten with the program. But I think we need to kind of consider that we're talking about a huge change in a sector of the industry that has been operating this way for 100 years. And so your traditional utility model has shareholders that are pension plans and teachers unions and the like, and regulators are trying to figure out what safe, reliable, affordable, clean, right? So when I started, clean was not it. It was safe, reliable, and affordable. And part of what I shared my opening remarks with you is that affordable is a real tricky word because it's affordable to who? What we know is that what we think is affordable for 30% of the country is actually not affordable. And so trying to figure out what all that looks like while upgrading the grid, while dealing with kind of all the issues that we have around interconnections around the country. All of that stuff, I think, is going to be probably the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity, because I do think if we can find a way to bring some new thinking, right, to say, if I started today, what would it look like? And then kind of back into what we have and how we get there, I think you can come up with something. But it's going to be a big job, and I think we underestimate how hard it is for regulators to kind of figure out what the middle is, and then add to that every single jurisdiction is different, right? And so every jurisdiction has a PSC or PUC, and so sometimes you're talking about the city council, and sometimes you're talking about a municipal, and all of these things that are going on. And so how do you kind of do all of that at once, I think is going to be tough, but I think it's achievable. I think we have to be creative about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, something that sort of goes to your point about customized campaigns, right? As Paula so eloquently pointed out, we're fighting these battles at every layer, and so similar theme, but customizing the message. Partly you're here because you're not an energy wonk like the rest of us. So I'm not going to ask you what you think the hardest part of this solar plus decade will be, although you're welcome to opine on that if you'd like to. But in terms of communicating, right? What do you see as our biggest challenge in terms of communicating around it, and our biggest opportunity?
Well, the biggest challenge on communicating, and this is not a knock on what you just said at all, is not to get caught up in the details, honestly. Don't let those details stop you from communicating.
It's hard for energy wonks to hear that.
Yes. Don't assume, and I've worked on energy policy. I have not worked for an energy company. But don't assume that people know how solar even works. Don't assume that people know how many advancements that you've made on solar. Don't assume people know about the affordability issues. The last thing they could have heard about this was it being out of their price range 10 years ago. So go back to the basics and explain how solar works. Explain the accessibility and the affordability to the extent you can. And I know every jurisdiction is different and every company is different. But those are critical messages, just like you would be communicating to a consumer when you're trying to sell a product. If you want solar to be part of the clean energy solution, whatever that may be, at the state level, at the city council level, or at the national level, it has to be doable, and it has to be relatable, and it needs to be sticky. And if you don't know what I mean by sticky, that is the critical thing in determining the effectiveness of a message. Does it stick? And if it sticks, if you can do exactly what you said earlier, make it relevant to people's lives. Does it reduce their energy cost? Does it make them feel like they're part of a climate solution? And depending upon who you're talking to, that could be incredibly important and motivating to them. As I said at the beginning, I run a company that is basically comprised of millennials. And they really care about climate. And every day or every week, it feels like somebody's late for work because they're in the middle of getting solar panels installed. And DC has, lots of incentives for that. But they're doing it not just because over time, these are millennials who can't see past the next 10 years, never mind 30 years for it to pay off. But they're doing it because they want to be they want to do their part in something. They want to feel like they're part of the solution. It's not just marching, it's not just protesting, it's not just voting, but they're actually taking steps to address climate change. So you have to keep it simple, realize who you're talking to, create the incentive for them on their terms. Just like when I was talking about Democrats versus Republicans. For Democrats, renewing the solar tax credit is a huge victory, where there are no climate victories for them right now. Everything that they had done and counted as victories has been wiped away. And we don't have to agree on the reasons for that. It doesn't matter. That's just a fact. And that's where Democrats are coming from. So renewing that tax credit would be a huge victory for them. And for Republicans, you know, Abby, you had said and recited some polling that 60-some% of Republicans believe that solar is part of a climate solution. There are a lot of them sitting on Capitol Hill who are uncomfortable without having something to point to for taking action. There's also a lot of Republicans where hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs have been created in their states who are dependent on that tax credit, and with consumers that are dependent on that tax credit. So create that incentive for your audience and keep it simple.
I like it. Keep it sticky. Sticky and simple.
Sticky.
So we're getting closer to the end of our panel, and I want to invite each of you, so you have this incredibly engaged and focused audience in front of you. What is the one thing each one of you would encourage the audience to do to help make this Solar Plus decade a reality? Okay. Do you want to start? Well, we can mix it up. Stephanie, you want to go first?
I'm gonna slightly repeat myself.
Yeah, it's okay.
But everybody in this room has a network. And I know that Abby and the rest of the folks have lots of asks.
We do.
And lots of messaging. And I think that everybody should think about who they can share that with and how they can expand that circle of reach on solar energy. So that you're not the only one out there communicating on it and you're creating your own advocacy space.
I would say be committed to the work. Be committed to the work in the long haul and meet people where they are. Not where you are, but where they are. And then really ignore the noise. Stay focused.
I would say, Paula, you guys are being so concise, we actually have a little more time.
Okay.
But meet people where they are. I'm thinking going back to the regulators, right? Sort of understanding where folks are, both in workforce development, in policy development, in regulatory development, right? It would be great if everyone shared our vision for the Solar Plus decade today.
Right.
But that's not the reality we live in, and so sort of Stephanie's communications points work for regulators. They work for lawmakers. They work for customers, right? There's applicability sort of across the spectrum in your point.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think understanding where that person is. So, when I was a lobbyist many years ago, it was always important for me to understand what my opponent believed and then understand what was important to the person that I was lobbying. And then figured out how did my message fit in that overall narrative? And being really clear on what was going to be really hard in terms of shifting somebody's perspective and what might be easier. But that meant I had to put in a whole lot of work on the front end. And I couldn't get upset and frustrated because a regulator or a legislator made a choice that was different than what I wanted, because perhaps I didn't understand their priorities. And so I think meeting people where they are, what I'm saying is also like understanding what the priorities are of that person and being okay with the fact that your priority is not necessarily their priority, but that doesn't mean that you can't get work done and shift ideas. It just means that you've got to be really strategic and really focused on how you do it. And I think Stephanie's comments about messaging are, if you take nothing away from what I've said, please, I think messaging is just so, so important. Because who you're speaking to and how you speak to them matters, and it's going to be different for everybody. It just is, but you got to know what's going to work and take that time first.
Great, thank you. Brian.
Well, I think we're in danger of being massively aligned on this point, which isn't very good. You want me to be controversial or something? No, I won't. I think it's a variation on the theme, because I was coming at it from the point of view of always keep the end user in mind. Because I think we have to treat this as eventually the people who use the energy have to understand and vote with their feet and change their behavior to kind of enable it all. So I think we've got to think very deeply about the real needs of the end users and then collaborate with all the various partners who deliver that. So nobody alone can meet that need. We can't, as Shell, despite, we're a pretty big company, we don't have all the capabilities, we don't have the reach, etc. So you've got to find who you collaborate with and build the trust so that you can maybe have some unusual partnerships that you wouldn't think why, they should be fighting each other. But it's maybe a bit like lobbying or something. At some point you realize that actually your interests are aligned, and you just got to give a little bit on your side to get the outcome. So start with the outcome in mind, which is serving the needs of the customer and also kind of getting the energy system to a better place. And I think it's that mix between the needs of the customer and the needs of the system, which brings society in as well. Because the worry I have about just only focusing on the needs of the customer is the relatively wealthy customers will be the first ones to vote because they can probably afford it. And you get quite a lot of issues of social housing and others, and how do you bring everybody along on the journey? And there's some interesting, people are tackling that elsewhere in the world. We're trying to give focused subsidies. So I think there'd be my views is end user, collaborate, and then this sort of deeply understanding needs and putting it all together, and that's probably our best chance.
So I did not plan this, but I really took away from this conversation 3 things: customers, all of our customers, collaboration, and communication. And so that's what I would give to you as you think about the Solar Plus decade and your role in it. Think about your customer, think about who you can collaborate with, and think about the best ways to communicate.
3 C's.
So I would encourage the 3 C's. See, we're making it up as we go along. I like it. I would really encourage you to visit SIA's booth, which is right outside the front entrance to the exhibit hall. There's lots of information, lots of messaging, lots of opportunity to engage. You are doing this to help your business. It will also help the planet, but it will help your business, and that is a huge priority for us, and I know for you. Please join me in thanking our panel. You guys have done a great job. Much appreciated. So you can, and we are now going to hear, thank you, from a local friend, a local partner representing Vivint Solar.
Please welcome to the stage David Bywater, President and Chief Executive Officer at Vivint Solar.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome to SPI and welcome to Utah. I'm David Bywater, the CEO for Vivint Solar, one of the largest residential solar providers in the country. Utah is our home state. We're headquartered just south of here, about 20 miles. We are so pleased to see the renewable energy industry convene on Salt Lake City. This city has made the commitment to transition to 100% renewable energy for community electricity in 2030, which we're excited about. The state motto in Utah, and if you saw it as you came out of the airport, is Life Elevated. When I think about what we're doing collectively, it is exactly what this motto is about. It applies perfectly. It is about elevating the lives of our consumers and helping them power their lives through clean, renewable energy. This is elevated living in action. It is amazing to witness and have the opportunity to contribute to the astounding growth of renewable energy and solar across this country. Collectively, we are making a difference, not just for our customers, but for our employees and for the environment. Consider how far we've come, and especially the information that was shared by Julia and Abby. It is amazing how far this industry has come. I often talk to my kids, well, we all talk to our kids, but I often talk to my kids about what I do for a living. And the other day I was talking to them about how crazy it would be if we powered our house using well oil. Think about it. I'm going to use well oil like we did back in the 1800s. Well, what's interesting about that and how crazy that sounds, to my kids, it is as crazy to think that they used to power their homes by well oil as it is that today we power our homes and our lives and our cars by anything other than renewable energy. They can't fathom a future that isn't powered by clean renewable energy, especially when you can power it with the comparable costs that we're now achieving as an industry. Every facet of renewable growth is critical, whether it's residential, commercial, community, utility, personal, or whatever. Storage is critical to our success as well. And we should embrace an all-the-above approach. I echo what all of our panelists and our speakers have said. It should be an all-the-above. Given that our environment is begging the citizens of the world to go green and be responsible for how we cohabitate on this planet. I think the work that we collectively are doing is incredible. It matters because we're literally changing the world. We are truly elevating lives. But like Abby said, I know we can do so much more. In fact, we need to do so much more. Our not so distant future should be one which is powered completely by renewable energy. We are the drivers of this revolution. We need to elevate our craft. We need to elevate this industry. We need to accelerate it. There is no better industry for us to champion, and I applaud your efforts collectively for what you're doing. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your dedication to driving this change forward. Thank you to SIA and thank you to SEPA for bringing us together at this remarkable and relevant convention to open more doors for solar and to make a much needed change in our world. I hope all of you enjoy your time in Utah and at this conference. Let's push each other. Let's literally push each other to collaborate more, to accelerate more, and to continue to elevate our efforts to power the world through clean and affordable renewable energy. The world is counting on us to succeed. Thank you and welcome to Salt Lake.